Hey folks, hey folks, hey folks, hey folks. All right, let me get into some of your questions. I'm going to jump into things today. Really interesting week that we have had here. Let me start with a bunch of questions and try and pull them together. Hey folks, I always laugh at that introduction now because, I long for the day when I will play that introduction and then my next thing to say will be like, well, nothing happened for the last 4 days, so let's all quit, go home. Because once again, things have been incredibly busy. Looks like Facebook is on here, and we got people from Pennsylvania and Kansas. And hi, Kristen. And Mesa, Arizona, and Houston, and California. Boy, all these hot places. You guys are all inside where it's cool. Do we have anybody from Canada or Alaska? We got Pennsylvania again. Anyway, actually, it's hot here in Maine too. And the truth is that I just got in from the water, so I'm feel great. Anyway, I want to get to a bunch of stuff today because there's a lot going on, and I know it's really sort of overwhelming. The one thing that I would urge you to do before you look at news stories is to remember that there's a couple of things going on. One is the impression that the administration is trying to give to the American people, and that is that they are very, very strong and that resistance to what they are doing is futile. And the other is whether or not what they are doing is legal. And let me explain what I mean by that. So one of the things that you saw, I think it was yesterday, I'm sorry, I've sort of, I always lose track of days, was Trump taking control of the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police. Um, and and the movement into Washington, D.C. of National Guard troops and troops from a number of the different pieces of the government that answer to the Department of Homeland Security. And that's important. I hope I remember to tell you why that's important. And he is doing that by using a couple of I don't want to call them loopholes, but things that are written into the home rule law that gave residents of Washington, D.C., the power to have some control over their government. Because Washington, D.C. is different than any place else in this country in that it is overseen by Congress. The Constitution gives Congress control over the District of Columbia. Now, there's a big fight about that. A lot of people, including me, actually think that the District of Columbia ought to be a state. It ought to have representation, and that the actual amount of land that Congress controls should be smaller. But the reason that we got a District of Columbia controlled by Congress is actually many, many years later, a little bit amusing. And that's that when the Congress under the Articles of Confederation was in Philadelphia, and the soldiers for the Revolutionary War were furious because they weren't getting paid. The soldiers actually went and started pounding on the doors of Congress and saying, hey, dudes, hand over the cash. It's not literally what they said, but there was real concern that they would do that. And the lawmakers turned to police officers and said, hey, you got to protect us. And they're like, actually, we're on the side of the soldiers. So that's why it is written that the Washington, D.C. should be overseen by Congress so that they would be able to have control over things like that. Anyway, so there is in that the ability of the president to commandeer the police force for up to 30 days if he chooses to do that. And, it's a pretty sweeping power, although theoretically Congress should sign off on it. Congress is now out of session. I'm sure that was part of the calculation that went in there. Not literally out of session. They are not currently in attendance there. That actually matters too. So the reason that it matters that it's the people from the troops that respond under the Department of Homeland Security, things like ATF, for example, is because that part of the government is very new. It's a product of the war on terror. And as a result, it is not covered or does not currently consider itself covered by the Posse Comitatus Act. Now, the Posse Comitatus Act, you're going to hear a lot about, not only from me now, but you're going to hear about it from a lot of people, but also I'm going to write about it soon because the Posse Comitatus Act is a really interesting part of our history. It is a law from 1878 that says that the government cannot use American troops against American citizens. And originally it was written only to apply to the US Army, but the other branches of the US military have said that they consider themselves covered by it. Department of Homeland Security has not. All right, that's why that matters. It's a lot of like in the weeds stuff in the government. Anyway, the reason that we got that law in 1878 was because in 1877, the US government under President Rutherford B. Hayes used the military against strikers on a number of the major railroad lines in the country, primarily the railroad line of Thomas Scott. And Thomas Scott was a railroad baron who had been instrumental in making sure that Rutherford B. Hayes got the presidency in 1876, although he had not won the popular vote. That went to Tilden. And so the fact that Hayes is inaugurated in March of 1877, and in July of 1877, he uses the US military to protect Thomas Scott's interests. A lot of people were like, hey, this is so not okay. And they end up using the Congress ends up passing the Posse Comitatus Act and saying the government can't use the military against American citizens. And during those debates, actually somebody says to the people who are proponents of that law, do you really mean that you can't use the government against, what happens if somebody elects a socialist to become a mayor of a state, of a city, which had recently happened in Pennsylvania? And the guy said, yeah, we mean the government can't do that. And so that's what the Posse Comitatus Act is. The exception to that is domestic insurrection. And the government has called out troops in times of what it considers domestic insurrection, both in the 19th century and in the 20th century. So that's what the Posse Comitatus Act is. Just a little bit of a rabbit hole there to add is it's one of the things that really made life for Indigenous Americans extraordinarily difficult in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, because the people who were intruding on their grazing lands, for example, or who were running off their cattle or their horses were US citizens, and the people who were supposed to be protecting Indigenous Americans were the US Army. And so the US Army by law could not be law enforcement officers against those American citizens who were intruding on Lakota land, for example. And that's why you get the rise in that period of Indigenous police forces that work with the US government. Sometimes people misunderstand that and think that they were somehow sellouts or whatever. That was literally the only way that the Lakotas, for example, and other tribes as well, had any protection against the Euro-American interlopers onto their land because of the Posse Comitatus Act. All right, you're going to hear a lot more about that, but that exception is going to be important going forward. The reason I just went into all that is because although Trump and the administration are trying to make it look like they are controlling the federal troops to go after American citizens on the streets of Washington, D.C., in fact, their purview is very narrow. What they are trying to do is make it look like they are all powerful, when in fact, they are operating under a very slim and possibly illegal, because of the circumstances under which the administration can take over the police, for example, that requires an emergency. And while Trump has insisted that there is an emergency in Washington, D.C., the crime there is at a 30-year low. Which suggests this isn't an emergency. And just for the record, the Republicans have actually just taken $1 billion away from law enforcement, among other things, in Washington, D.C., literally defunding the police. So the idea that somehow there's an emergency that has to be answered with this militarization will be challenged in court. Now, the reason that I can say that this is what they are trying to do to create this image is because in California right now, there is an ongoing court case about the use of troops during in June and July in Los Angeles, which you may remember on July 7th, there was the real use of American troops in MacArthur Park to really make it look like the troops were bearing down on American citizens, along with ICE in MacArthur Park. And that has been challenged, and there's a court case going on about it right now. And one of the things that the administration is saying is that, yes, they believe that the soldiers should be covered by the Posse Comitatus Act, and that they were there to make a federal show of force, that this was about image. Now, they are being countered with the reality that they might have said they should be covered by the Posse Comitatus Act, but they were actually doing the sorts of law enforcement activities that they should not have been doing under that act. And that's what the court case is about. So, but they made it very clear that this is what they were doing. They're trying to look really impressive. And the other aspect of that is of some interest is that this administration has been consistently fighting court cases, not based on the merits, but on aspects of cases that are simply sort of the mechanics of a case. That is, what they are arguing is that they're in the wrong court, or that so-and-so doesn't have standing, or whatever. Not that what they're doing is actually wrong. They're trying to obfuscate a lot of what's going on. All right, that you need to have in front of you, because you're seeing people talking in all sorts of places about Trump having declared martial law, everything is over. In fact, that's not the case. Washington, D.C. is a special case, and even within that special case, there are a lot of limits. That's not to say it's okay. This is deliberately designed to make people afraid of the administration, to make them less likely to speak out. But it is not, nobody has declared martial law, and there is not, martial law means, among other things, that people don't have the right to due process, among other things. That hasn't been declared in Washington or elsewhere. So the reason I mention that is because one of the things that's really clear right now is that the administration is trying to look like it's extraordinarily powerful. And it's not. And let me tell you about a couple other things here. I'm actually on a fairly tight schedule today, because I got to run to yet another hot date. This is my second of the summer. But you've heard a lot about Trump and his people talking about how they're going to have this meeting with Vladimir Putin in Alaska, and that this is going to end the Russian, this is not what they're calling it, but Russia's attack on Ukraine. And what you've seen since they made this big announcement was the fact that this is disintegrating. That is, it turns out that Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, who's a real estate person who doesn't actually have any training in negotiations and doesn't speak Russian, appears to have misunderstood what the terms were that Putin was offering. They've had to retract what they said was going on, and the Russians have been laughing about it. And now today, Trump and the administration are dramatically walking back what they said they were going to accomplish in that meeting on Friday. And a couple of things that really jump out about it. One is that the many countries that are supporting Ukraine essentially appear to be ignoring what Trump wants to do. Now, of course, American support for Ukraine is really important, but a number of other countries around the world, especially in Europe, have been Europe and Australia have been, and Canada. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said especially in Europe. There are a lot of countries around the world that are supporting Ukraine, and they are essentially saying, okay, if you Americans are not going to participate, we're going to do it without you. And if you look at the way Trump is reacting to that, he keeps trying to impress people with the idea that his meeting is going to be really, really important. But I think he's really afraid of the idea that maybe it's not, that maybe that what the Vladimir Putin and Trump have counted on really since 2016 is that America is such a big dog that what America does, the rest of the world is going to have to sign on to. And you can see this with Trump's tariffs as well. And instead, what you have started to see is other countries saying, okay, if you don't want to play, you don't have to play. We're going to work around you. And that, I think, is frightening to Trump and to the administration. There's also the problem for it that by offering a greeting to Vladimir Putin for the first time since 2007 on American soil, the United States is openly allying itself with somebody that the International Criminal Court has indicted as a war criminal for stealing children from Ukraine. And I don't quite see how they missed that and what a hornet's nest it would stir up. Maybe they're thinking that Americans don't care about the International Criminal Court because we are not a signatory to it, but we were not to the treaty that created it. But we didn't do that because we argued at the time. I mean, many of us suspect there were a number of things going on, not least that Americans were afraid some of our leaders would show up in front of the International Criminal Court. But we argued that we didn't need the International Criminal Court because we had a justice system that was as good as any. And so you could simply bring people to justice in front of Americans. I think a number of people no longer believe that to be the case. And so for the United States to essentially flout what the International Criminal Court has said about Vladimir Putin and welcoming him to U.S. soil is a really big deal. And so this meeting is kind of blowing up in their faces. There is also another way in which the administration appears to be in real trouble and flailing, and that is these jobs numbers, which show that the job creation is stalling, inflation numbers, which came out today and suggest that inflation is rising. It's up to 3.1% for this year, it's gone up every the last 3 months, and it was coming down under Biden. If you remember, we had that extraordinary inflation after the worst of the coronavirus pandemic. But then inflation consistently began to come down. And it is no longer coming down. In fact, it's going the other way. So it's now for 3 months been going up, and now is at 3.1%, which is significantly over what the Fed likes it to be, which is about 2%. So they're concerned about that, and they're concerned enough about it to have fired the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and now to have tried to replace them with a Trump loyalist who says that essentially, we shouldn't be putting out these numbers any longer until we figure out exactly how to do it, more accurately. Well, the United States always had the most accurate figures of anywhere. That was the gold standard. And now, of course, that is under attack, again, in an attempt to make us think that that he's in control of everything. But that's something that's making a lot of people really, really nervous. Now, of course, the real thing that is on everybody's minds that they are trying to cover up for, that they're trying to distract from, are the Epstein files and the reality that we know Trump has been mentioned multiple times in them. That's from a July 23rd article from the Wall Street Journal. Something interesting about that I may or may not get to, but that is, clearly they recognize that is a huge liability for Trump, because so many of his MAGA supporters believed that he was going to release those files because he was leading the charge against sex trafficking of children. That's what QAnon was about, after all. And now that it turns out that he's protecting those people, and that he was palling around with them at the very least, has split the MAGA base that is supporting Trump. So that's a real concern. And then, of course, things keep dropping into the news. So a number of you asked about, you can tell I'm trying to put together the questions you asked. A number of you asked about whether or not it is true that Ghislaine Maxwell, who was an associate of Jeffrey Epstein's, and who was his procurer, and who was sentenced in 2022, if I recall correctly, to 20 years in prison for sex trafficking, if she has been transferred, in fact, to a place where she is eligible for work release. And that information came out from Allison Gill, also known as Mueller, she wrote, who got an exclusive scoop yesterday. Now it's everywhere, that gave her the electronic files for Ghislaine Maxwell from the Bureau of Prisons. And in fact, yes, those files said that Ghislaine Maxwell had been moved to a minimum security work camp, as they are known. Prison camp, as they are known. And that's not prison camp in the sense that you know of it so much as the idea that it's a minimum security facility. to which she, as a sex offender, was not supposed to be transferred. They're not supposed to be transferred to those because they're a danger to the community. But somebody waived that and enabled her to get to this minimum security camp. And yes, according to that file that Allison Gill got, she is eligible for work release. And Gill makes the point that the terms of her release look very much like the original sweetheart deal that Jeffrey Epstein got from Alex Acosta, who went on to be Trump's Secretary of Labor during his first term. So that doesn't look so hot. And somebody said, a former deputy U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, wrote an article in The Hill today. And in that, he said, people are wondering if Trump had anything to do with this. Absolutely. The Department of Justice never would have done this without him signing off on it. You can bank on it. So that raises the question of, what did she offer, or what did she threaten Trump with that made him willing to switch her, to override her sexual offender status, put her in a minimum security facility, and make her eligible for work release? And that's a really big deal if you think about it. Far from actually going after sex offenders, the administration is actually giving her the original sweetheart deal, something that looks very much like the original sweetheart deal that Jeffrey Epstein got. When that deal came out, of course, it forced Alex Acosta to resign from his position in the first Trump White House because people were so outraged. So yes, that is true. All right. So what else is going on? I got a couple more things here that I really can't read very well, so I'll do the best I can. The other big under-discussed thing happening in the administration right now is that Trump's mental deterioration is very obvious now. And if you have any doubts about that, I urge you to watch the press conference he gave yesterday, which was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And that was him at his best. That was when they prepared him to go out in front of the cameras. And it is anybody who's dealt with people having mental deterioration issues will recognize what they're seeing. So there is, I think, worth watching a move to get as much power as they can under Trump for the next person in line. And I think it is worth watching that J.D. Vance has constantly been on vacation trying to keep himself away from the Trump sphere, and that he is really pushing the Epstein story in a kind of knifing Trump way, which suggests he's trying to pick up Trump's MAGA voters, and that he will not be unhappy to ease Trump out of the picture. So those things are, I think, big right now. A couple more things. I'm afraid I really can't read what I wrote here. It looks like ransom britches, and I'm sure it's not that. So you're not going to get whatever that was. You did ask about whether or not we can stop the ballroom from happening, that Trump wants to build the 90,000 square foot facility on what is currently the east wing of the White House. And the answer to that is simply the architectural approval should take 2 years. The other, the actual making that happen, the approvals and so on, should make that extraordinarily difficult to do. My own guess is that a lot of what you're seeing from Trump, like the gold all over the White House, the really not very well done gold all over the White House, the paving of the Rose Garden, and the putting in of cafe tables with umbrellas that, as somebody said, make it look like a Panera at a college campus. The idea of essentially building a structure that's larger than the existing White House, which is about 55,000 square feet, in order to have a ballroom, seems a little bit like trying to give him tasks that will make him happy, because he loves to redesign stuff. He loves real estate. The fact he was walking around the top of the White House the other day with an architect, a lot of that feels like, let's keep him occupied doing things he likes, because so much else is going poorly around him. All right. So can we stop that? Yeah, speak up. this is one of the things that I'm going to turn to now is ways in which you should not be discouraged about the things that are happening, because for all that Trump is trying to project an image of power, that the administration is trying to project that they're in control of things, in fact, the administration is extraordinarily unpopular. Trump is underwater on every single aspect of his presidency, sometimes by double digits or even more than 20 points. And by underwater, just a reminder, what we mean is that more people disapprove than approve of what he's doing. That's not 50-50. That's more people dislike what he's doing than approve of what he's doing. And pretty dramatically as well. Off the top of my head, I don't remember today's numbers, but they are absolutely not good for his job approval rating and his approval on any of the issues on which the administration has been working. So while that is out there, you are starting finally to see that people who were not engaged are getting engaged in a way that they have not been before. So one of the things that I've been watching is the reaction of business people to the Trump administration since the firing of the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the person who does the statistics for the Bureau of Labor. Mind you, there's a whole team there, and the commissioner is just the one person at the head of them. But that really struck fear into the hearts of an awful lot of business people who seemed quite willing to go along with the Trump administration. And you can see them now really starting to push back and starting to say, hey, wait a minute here. And if you're interested, I've done a plug for this guy before. I don't know him. I just follow him and read him. Carl Quintanilla, who writes on both Blue Sky and Twitter, has sort of a running a running list of what business people are saying. And when they're saying, hey, we don't feel like we can hire, or hey, we're laying people off, or hey, the small businesses are being really badly hit by the tariffs. You can see people starting to talk in a way that they weren't for a long time. For a long time, business people sort of said, well, eat the tariffs until we see whether or not Trump's really going to put them in place. Well, he really put them in place on August 7th. And now they're starting to say, we can't hire. We're losing money. We can't pay our debt. We think we need, we're going to have to retrench because of these things. All of those are business news, sure, but they're also forms of saying this administration is not working for us. You're also seeing it in the media. The sort of more mainstream media, as opposed to people, the independents, people like me who've been talking all along. During Trump's press conference yesterday, MSNBC next to him ran a column that showed where he was lying. Showed that, in fact, that the crime is way down in Washington, D.C., not up. Now, all of the media could have been fact-checking him in real time all along, and they only really have started to do it recently. And what that does is it defangs a lot of what he says, because it says the guy is totally out to lunch. He's living in a fantasy world, which was very clear, as I say, I was sort of privately fact-checking as I was watching. And it was just la-la land stuff that he was talking about. Well, now people are starting to show that. Crucially also, though, you're also seeing Democratic leaders in other states, in states like Texas, but also in other states, pushing back and doing what they can. So a report came out earlier this week that the Texas Democrats thought they were not going to be able to stand up against the redistricting in Texas because they couldn't afford logistically or financially to do it. You don't get paid a lot to be a legislator in Texas. Well, who stepped up to the plate? J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois. And that matters in part because he is getting involved in protecting small d democracy around the country, but also because it seems pretty obvious, I think, if you're watching the slate of people behave and the way they're behaving lately, that people like Pritzker expect to run for president. And he in 2028, and he believes that acting in the protection of democracy will attract people to vote for him. And in competition with him, you're seeing people like California Governor Gavin Newsom, who has been openly taunting Trump today, especially on X, but who has also released a letter to Trump saying, you're telling Republican-dominated states to redistrict because it's going to enable you to pick up a few seats. You try that, we will redistrict California. And we'll wipe out everything you've done. And then we'll see if we can get other people like Illinois, like New York, to redistrict their states. And we will beat you at your own game. And Mike Lukovich, who is a cartoonist, had a wonderful cartoon today that had a Republican elephant holding a gun. It's all a drawing, with a Democratic donkey holding two guns. And then over it said something like the redistricting fight. And the caption was the elephant saying, wait, you were supposed to bring a knife, because of that old saying that the Democrats always bring a knife to a gunfight. In this case, Gavin Newsom and the Democrats are bringing two guns to a fight where the Republicans only have one gun. And this is why you're seeing this howling on the part of the Republicans that the Democrats are the ones who are trying to cheat with redistricting. And the Democrats are out there, as James Tallarico of Texas said today to a right-wing interviewer, you're not seeing Democrats trying to redistrict in the middle of a census period the way the Republicans are. And people like Gavin Newsom saying, and J.B. Pritzker saying, we already prefer to do this with citizen-led, nonpartisan commissions. This is how we do it. But if you're going to continue to rig the system, we will bring the big guns, but we will only do it if you cheat. So you're seeing them sort of say, we want everybody to have citizen-led redistricting commissions, which, I'm 100% behind. I think that would go a long way in any state to making sure people are fairly represented. So so you're seeing the Democratic leaders pushing back against this. You're also seeing the American people increasingly stepping up and speaking up. And one of the people I wanted to plug today, the other day I plugged the card campaign. I wanted to plug the group, the Be Brave. There we go. The Be Brave coalition that is urging people to turn out on August 15th on overpasses around the country, but also to do whatever is creative and that speaks to you to defend American democracy. And they have a website you can go to. It is, I believe, bebrave.org, but I could be wrong about that. That's what's in my notes that I couldn't read. All right, so the American people are stepping up as well. And once again, I'm going to urge you to do the same, to go to meetings in your town, to talk about democracy, to stand up for what you think is right, to talk to your friends. One of the things that I'm going to urge you to do right now is that the EPA is trying to overturn the rule that enabled regulators to regulate the emissions of the gases that are causing climate change, to regulate their emission into the atmosphere. You can speak up about that. This is a period of public engagement in that. You can say what you think about it. It's very easy to do. I do these things all the time. Go speak up, because the US government has, during a rulemaking period, the American people can weigh in on that rule. Go do it. Speak up for what you care about. And you can do it anonymously with the recognition that your IP address, unless you go through a VPN, it's a VPN, I guess it's called, through a private network, will be traceable. But for me, that's a risk I was willing to take. Anyway, there are plenty of ways in which people can show up and are showing up. So you should absolutely be concerned by the ways in which the administration is trying to garner power. Absolutely. They're trying to create an autocracy. They're trying to create a dictatorship. There's no doubt about that. However, they remain a very small number of Americans. More than 50% of Americans voted for somebody other than Donald Trump, and his popularity has plummeted since then. It is now in the 30s. So recognize that we, those of us protecting small d democracy, who want to get rid of these radicals who are trying to take away our democracy and turn it into Christian nationalism, we are by far the majority. And we need to start acting like it and reminding people that we are a democracy. We have agency. This is our government. And to tell people what we want from that. I'm going to be working on that. And I would urge everybody else to be doing the same. All right, I'm going to run because in 10 minutes, I got to get ready for my date. Thank you for being here, and I will see you on Thursday. Talk to you later.